On a peaceful morning in the city center, Maxwell, a young police officer, stands guard at a busy street corner. He was in a bad mood. A long week with constant shifts and stressful incidents made him easily impatient. Suddenly, his eyes caught sight of a tall, black man, dressed in a sleek black suit, walking quickly across the street with a shiny metal suitcase. For some reason, the image of that man made Maxwell feel uneasy. The suitcase, with a discreet appearance, seemed to be hiding some secret. Maxwell lowered his sunglasses, frowned, and began to form assumptions in his mind. He looks too sneaky. Who needs such a suitcase at this time? Deciding not to let the man pass, Maxwell walked quickly to block him. "Stop! Where are you going?" Maxwell's voice was both solemn and cold. The man stopped and turned to face Maxwell. Despite being unexpectedly blocked, he still kept a calm attitude. "I'm going to work, officer." "Is there a problem?" he replied, his voice even but polite. Maxwell was not satisfied with the short answer. The feeling of doubt in him increased. His gaze stopped on the suitcase. "Open this suitcase." "I need to check," he ordered, his voice not hiding his imposition. The man frowned. His attitude was still calm but obviously uncomfortable. "Sorry, but in the suitcase are important documents. I can't open it, and I have the right to deny this request without a legal order." The refusal made Maxwell seem to be challenged. "You think I don't have the right to check? This is for public security." He grabbed the suitcase, and his gaze became intense. "Be careful, officer," the man warned, but Maxwell ignored it. He bent down and locked the suitcase decisively. As soon as the lock was turned on, a small sound rang out. Boom! A strong stream of red paint sprayed from the inside of the suitcase, shooting directly at Maxwell's face and uniform. He pulled back, his eyes wide open in shock. "Damn! What is this?" Maxwell screamed, trying to wipe the paint off his face, but the more he wiped it, the more it spread. Around, passers-by began to stop, curiously observing. When they realized what had just happened, laughter rang out everywhere. Some even held up their phones to film. The man stepped up quietly, picking up the suitcase from Maxwell's hand. "I've warned you," he said softly but firmly, showing no anger or losing his temper. He closed his suitcase, looked at Maxwell with meaningful eyes before turning to walk away, leaving the police officer in a state of confusion and embarrassment. The laughter from the crowd made Maxwell feel like he was being poked at even more. "It's not my fault. I'm just on duty," he said to himself, but deep down, he knew he had overreacted just because of prejudice and a sense of power. Maxwell, 32, is a police officer with the city's urban security force. From an early age, he was taught about resilience and loyalty to justice by his father, an experienced but strict former police officer. His father, a man who always believed in iron discipline, taught Maxwell that the law has no place for compromise. "My duty is to protect the innocent and maintain order, no matter what they face." These words were ingrained in Maxwell's mind. That was the guideline that led him into the police profession, where he always wanted to prove himself worthy of his father's legacy. However, the actual working environment is far from what he once dreamed of. In the early years of his career, Maxwell was always full of enthusiasm, but the harshness of the job gradually made him change. The pressure from the never-ending cases, the criticism from the public, and the frustration of witnessing criminals sometimes get away with punishment created a defensive wall in his soul. Maxwell became tough, impatient, and often acted instinctively rather than thoughtfully. 2 years ago, an event changed Maxwell forever. During a night shift, he tried to stop a theft at a supermarket but accidentally injured an innocent employee because he misidentified the subject. The incident caused Maxwell to be investigated internally and under tremendous pressure from the media. Although proven unintentional, the stain was deeply imprinted on his resume, making Maxwell always feel compelled to push himself up so that he wouldn't make the mistake again. Since then, Maxwell has become more cautious but also more suspicious. He is not easy to trust people and is always on the defensive. This is both a strength, helping him detect abnormal situations, but at the same time a weakness, making him sometimes rush to make the wrong decision. With the mysterious suitcase in the hands of a strange man today, everything that belongs to Maxwell, from responsibility and skepticism to feelings of insecurity due to professional pressure, rises. I can't let anything get out of control anymore, he told himself, bracing himself to act without anticipating the consequences. Andrew, 45, is a mysterious figure with a twisted past. He was an ordinary man from the outside, an average build, silver hair, and deep eyes full of contemplation. Andrew used to be a prominent scientist, specializing in biotechnology research in a prestigious laboratory. With his sharp intellect and unlimited creativity, he was once the pride of the scientific world. But that past is no longer intact. Years ago, Andrew was accused of participating in an unethical research project involving human testing. Although there was no clear evidence of guilt, the incident destroyed his career and reputation. From a pioneer in the field of science, Andrew became a social shunner. In the years that followed, he lived a life of evasion, no longer believing in the system and the people around him. Still, there is a burning purpose inside him: to prove his innocence and unravel the truth behind the crimes against which he is wronged. Therefore, Andrew spends most of his time collecting documents, secretly investigating the powerful figures behind the case in the past. He lived a life that was always on the brink, hiding from the pursuit of invisible enemies and struggling with the fear and insecurity in his own mind. That morning, Andrew had a suitcase in his hand, which contained documents that he considered to be vital evidence of his innocence. That suitcase was his whole life, the last hope for him to find justice that had been stolen. As he walked through the train station, Andrew tried to keep his composure, but in his heart there was a fierce battle. I must not expose the loophole, he said to himself, his hands clenching the handle of the suitcase so tightly that he was sweating. The eyes around him, although not very interested, still made him feel suffocated. His eyes flicked quickly over the passengers, trying to distinguish between the harmless and the ones who might be watching him. Andrew walked, his heart pounding every time he heard someone's footsteps getting too close. His back was straight, and his eyes tried to appear calm, but in his heart it was like strings that were stretched to the fullest. He was aware that, with just one small mistake, everything would fall apart. For him, this is not just a trip. This is the final battle to regain freedom and honor, a gamble that Andrew does not allow himself to lose. The case quickly became the focus of public opinion when increasingly thrilling details were revealed. From the moment the police announced that Maxwell, who was believed to be an ordinary banker, was involved in a high-tech heist, the media immediately picked up and spread the news at breakneck speed. Maxwell is no longer an unknown name. Television, newspapers, and social networks are constantly updating with the latest developments. The photos of him being arrested by the police in wrinkled clothes, emaciated face, but his eyes still kept a little calm, quickly spread. The public is divided into two streams of conflicting opinions. One side suspects him of being a genius thief. The other feels he is just the victim of a larger conspiracy. Maxwell, from prison, faces the storm with a mixture of bewilderment and anger. I didn't do anything wrong. Why did everything turn out like this? He wondered. His hands unconsciously clenched the chair in the interrogation room. Every time he heard the door open, his heart pounded, because he didn't know who was going to enter next time. A lawyer? A new interrogator? Or the real enemy who was hiding behind this drama? Meanwhile, investigators are under increasing pressure from the public and authorities. They know that this is no longer an ordinary case, but a complex game of chess with many forces involved. They dug deeper into Maxwell's background, and this led to the discovery of unexpected connections. A mysterious bank account, confusing transactions, and encrypted emails that Maxwell claimed he had never sent. Outside, public opinion boiled even more when surveillance clips at the station, where Maxwell was arrested, were released. In the video, Maxwell appears with a hurried appearance, a face full of anxiety, but does not take any clear action to prove that he is doing something illegal. Some journalists are starting to ask, could Maxwell be a pawn in a bigger plan? On social media, hashtags #JusticeForMaxwell quickly become a trend. A wave of supporters emerged, including human rights activists and technology experts. They began to analyze public evidence, looking for holes in the police's arguments. Maxwell, from a forgotten person in ordinary life, now feels like a pawn in a game of power between the public, the media, and the government. What do I have to do to save myself? He thought, his eyes glued to the cold wall in the cell, his heart full of unease. Maxwell's psychology is increasingly pent up as he feels completely out of control of what is happening. But deep in his heart, a glimmer of hope was still smoldering. He knew that, if the truth was not clarified, not only him but others would also become victims of injustice. And because of that, Maxwell was determined that, no matter what force he faced, he couldn't give up. Maxwell sat across from Detective Jacobs in the cramped interrogation room, the cold white light shining down from the ceiling lamp, revealing the tired look on his face. But this time, unlike before, Maxwell's eyes flashed with determination. He was no longer confused or worried, but looked like someone who was ready to face anything. Jacobs placed the thick file on the table, turning the pages as if he were reenacting a prepared play. Maxwell, this is your last chance to tell the truth. This bank account, this transaction, and those encrypted emails, they all lead to you. Maxwell took a deep breath. I've already said, I don't do those things. This evidence is fake. Someone is trying to trap me. His answer didn't surprise Jacobs, but his gaze seemed to soften a little. Pushing back his chair, Jacobs said slowly, You're not the first person I've met who insists on my innocence. But this time, I'm not sure you're lying. At that moment, a police officer walked in and handed Jacobs a new piece of paper. Detective Jacobs glanced over and his face changed, from solemn to tense. Maxwell, it looks like we've just found what you need. Jacobs placed the document on the table, flipping to the page containing a photograph of a middle-aged man with a familiar appearance. Andrew, your old colleague. Do you know what he's been doing lately? Maxwell leaned back, frowning. Andrew? Impossible. He had nothing to do with this. He's not even good at technology. But when he looked at the photo, Maxwell felt a creeping sense of insecurity. But what's wrong? Jacobs continued. Not only is Andrew better at technology than you think, but he's also the mastermind behind this case. We have just found a secret network that he used to coordinate the entire plan, including hooking you up to distract the investigation. These words were like a direct punch to Maxwell. He stood up, unable to believe his ears. Andrew? But why? Why did he do it to me? Jacobs nodded, his voice lowered. He knows you have a clean and reliable record. You are the perfect shield for all his illegal transactions. When we took a closer look at the data, the details all showed that Andrew deliberately used his personal information to cover up his behavior. Maxwell felt both angry and heartbroken. He recalled intimate conversations with Andrew, times when they worked together late. He took advantage of me. All this time, I have trusted him. Maxwell slammed his fist on the table, a feeling of indignation surging in every word. Jacobs looked at Maxwell, his eyes showing sympathy. I understand how you feel, but this was an opportunity for him to regain his honor. We need your cooperation to capture Andrew. He's not only involved in this theft but could also be a link in a larger organization. Maxwell sat down, his hands clenched together. His mind was torn between anger and determination. I will do everything to expose the truth. But I want him to pay for what he did to me. Jacobs nodded. Good. But remember, you need to stay calm. We are facing a very dangerous person. The feeling of relief because the truth has gradually become clear is mixed with insecurity about what is to come. Maxwell knew that the battle was not over. This was just the beginning of a new confrontation. A fight to not only reclaim his own purity, but also to bring down the man who had betrayed his faith. In the police department's meeting room, the air was so heavy that it could be felt through every breath. The attendees, from Detective Jacobs, the captain of the police department, to the members of the investigation team, all kept their faces tense. On the slideshow, Andrew's image, suspicious transactions, and network diagrams related to the case are clearly visible. Jacobs stood at the head of the table, tapping the pen lightly on the board. Our problem now is clear. Andrew is not only the mastermind, but also very dangerous. He built a sophisticated system to manipulate and use Maxwell as a shield. We need a specific strategy to capture him before he disappears. The captain of the police department, a middle-aged man with an austere and interrupted face. Jacobs, are you sure of this evidence? We can't let Maxwell be wronged for another second. The public is watching closely. Jacobs nodded, his eyes steadfast. I checked all the data again. There was no doubt that Andrew was the target. Maxwell has been trapped from the beginning. And now we need his cooperation to lure Andrew into the light. Maxwell, who was sitting quietly at the end of the table, clasped his hand tightly. He felt the pressure on his shoulders. Although he has been partly exonerated, he still feels insecurity. What do you want me to do? He spoke up, his voice deep but full of determination. Jacobs turned to Maxwell, his eyes filled with both trust and worry. Maxwell, you have a very important role in this plan. Andrew believes that he still does not know the truth, and that is our greatest advantage. You will have to meet him, follow our instructions, and lure him into a trap. Maxwell was silent for a long time, his eyes fluctuating between bewilderment and determination. Finally, he raised his head. If this can help me regain my honor, I will. But I want to make sure you'll be there when things happen. The captain of the police department stepped forward, placing his hand on Maxwell's shoulder. You don't have to do this alone. The whole team will support him step by step. But you also need to be prepared. Andrew is not an easy person to deal with, Jacobs quickly added. We will monitor the entire meeting. A special response team will be nearby. As long as you do what you have discussed, we will have a chance to arrest him on the spot. Maxwell sighed, his eyes shining with an unconcealable worry. I understand, but he used to be a colleague, even someone I considered a friend. This is not easy for me. Jacobs looked deep into Maxwell's eyes, his voice slow but powerful. I know, but he couldn't let his emotions overwhelm him. This is the only chance to end it all. And you didn't just do this for yourself, but also to prevent him from continuing to harm others. The whole meeting room fell silent for a while. Finally, the captain nodded, signaling for everyone to prepare. Okay, we have a plan. I'll get ready. No mistakes are allowed. Maxwell got up and walked out of the meeting room with Jacobs. He felt a vague fear, but at the same time a burning determination. He knew that this was not only an opportunity to exonerate, but also to face the pain of betrayal. Although he was still hesitant in his heart, he secretly promised himself that he would not let Andrew get away with it, not only for himself but also for justice. After the case came to light, the media exploded with a series of sensational headlines. From Maxwell's vindication to exposing the entire fraud network run by Andrew, the story quickly became the focus of every discussion. Maxwell, who was once seen as a traitor, has now become a symbol of courage. However, he did not feel comfortable in front of the attention. As he walked out of the courtroom after the official acquittal, Maxwell faced a large crowd. The sound of the camera clicking continuously, mixed with a flood of questions from reporters. Maxwell, how does it feel to be vindicated? Do you have any messages for Andrew? What do you think of the public's reaction to you? Maxwell did not immediately respond. He paused for a moment, adjusted his breathing, trying to control the chaos in his heart. While he kept calm on the outside, inside, emotions were intertwined between relief, fatigue, and bitterness. In the end, he just said a brief sentence. I want to thank those who have trusted and helped me. This was a painful lesson, but it helped me realize the true value of honesty and trust. That simple but sincere statement made the crowd silent for a moment before continuing to inquire. Inside the police department, Jacobs watched through a live television screen. He sighed, both satisfied and worried. He's handled quite well, but the pressure from public opinion won't go away easily. He turned to the captain, who was standing next to him, and continued, We need to follow Maxwell closely. Make sure he is not mentally drained by the media. Meanwhile, social networks are flooded with mixed comments. Some praised Maxwell as a hero for daring to confront Andrew. Hashtags like #JusticeForMaxwell and #MaxwellTruth quickly became a trend. But there are also critical comments and doubts about his motives. Is he really innocent? Or is this just a way to save his image? Maxwell was just lucky to get away with it. Who knows what he really thinks? Maxwell read those comments quietly as he sat alone in his small apartment. He felt a hole in his heart, not because of the criticism, but because he realized that not everyone was willing to forgive or understand him. The memory of the days of being attacked and belittled still haunts him. In an interview with a major TV channel, Maxwell decided to tell the truth. His eyes were sharper, and his voice was clear. I'm not a perfect person, but I did what I could to prove the truth. The most important thing I learned was not to let fear control me. I hope this story will serve as a reminder that everyone has the right to be exonerated, and that no one should be judged before the truth is revealed. His sharing touched the hearts of many people, gradually soothing conflicting opinions. However, Maxwell knew that in order to rebuild his life, he needed time, and he needed to keep facing himself. Jacobs went to see Maxwell the next day, carrying a brochure. He put it on the table, then patted Maxwell on the shoulder. Listen, Maxwell. I know you're tired, but he did what few people dared to do. Now it's time to start again. These are a couple of new opportunities, and I think you deserve it. Maxwell smiled slightly. Thanks, Jacobs. But first, I need time to heal. I not only want to live, but I also want to work more meaningfully. The public reaction continued, but Maxwell gradually learned not to let it dominate him. He focused on rebuilding his life one step at a time, with the help of those who truly trusted him. That night, Maxwell sat quietly in the dark room, the light from the small table lamp shining on his face, casting long shadows on the walls. Things had changed in just a short period of time, and even though he had been exonerated, his feelings weren't quite the relief he had imagined. The window opened slightly, letting in the moonlight, but Maxwell paid no attention to the peace outside. He was lost in thought. The questions kept repeating in his head. Did I really win? Can I continue to live like before? For the past year, the pain and suffering he experienced suddenly rose like a big wave, sweeping away everything. Images of the days of imprisonment, false accusations, shunned by the public. It all seemed to be intact in his mind. The ridicule from old friends, the suspicious gaze from strangers, the feeling of abandonment, they had cut deeper into his heart than any physical wound. And now, despite being vindicated, Maxwell feels like he's standing in the middle of a vast abyss where transparency can't erase the stain on him. Andrew, what did he do to me? Maxwell wondered. Andrew wasn't the first to push him into a terrible situation, but he was certainly the one who prolonged Maxwell's pain for a long time. Behind the image of a powerful, scheming man is a malicious person who never thinks about the consequences of his actions. Maxwell couldn't forget Andrew's cold face when he ordered Maxwell to follow his orders, forcing him to engage in activities he didn't want. Secret encounters, shady deals, all make Maxwell feel like he is trapped in a trap that he himself cannot get out of. What Andrew did was not only force Maxwell into dangerous situations, but also manipulate his mind. In the darkest of hours, Maxwell wondered if he was really a victim, or if he himself had accidentally become a part of Andrew's game. But that doesn't matter anymore. Everything has been exposed, and Andrew is now the one who has been debunked. However, Maxwell cannot deny that Andrew's existence in his life has created a major shock, a change that he simply cannot ignore. He sighed and reached up to rub his forehead. Why didn't I realize sooner? Maxwell still couldn't accept that he had been taken advantage of and pushed to the brink of despair. The fact that Andrew is not simply an enemy in a story, but also an image of betrayal, of someone who has made him lose everything he once believed in. At this point, he wondered if he could forgive what had happened. But a part of him knew in his heart that the important thing now was not to seek revenge or punishment for Andrew. Maxwell could not live forever in resentment. He needed to look ahead, even though he didn't fully understand where the road ahead would lead him. He only knew that he had to do it all over again. He wanted to find peace in his heart, without having to live in the darkness of the past. Andrew, with all his cruelty and intrigue, has been an integral part of Maxwell's story. But that story is not the end. Maxwell couldn't let Andrew control his life forever. He will have to move on his own, learn to face the past and regain his strength. It was the only decision he could make right now, no matter how painful it was. Maxwell got up, approached the window and looked out. The faint moonlight reflected on the ground. He took a long breath, feeling the fresh air around him. Finally, he smiled slightly, not because everything had been settled, but because he knew he had survived the storm. And whether Andrew still exists or not, Maxwell knows that he will never let that past continue to control him. Maxwell stood quietly in the quiet space of the room, his mind still not completely free from the vortex of the past. The events of the past year, the hidden secrets, the internal battles have gradually been resolved. However, the relief he had originally imagined did not come. Instead, there was a cold sanity in him, as if all he had just experienced was a long nightmare. He looked out the window at the darkness, the street lights flickering like small stars in the distance. His footsteps were steady, but there was still a little doubt in his heart. Struggles are not simply about finding the truth or smashing slander, but sometimes it's about finding oneself again. Is that all I can do? Maxwell asked himself in moments of silence. That question made him pause for a moment, contemplating. He doesn't regret fighting, but the feeling of emptiness persists. It's hard to accept that things can't go back to what they used to be. He can't go back to the time before it all happened, where his life was his own, where he had never been tormented by terrifying truths. But then, a thought flashed through his mind. I survived. No matter how the story ends, he is still the one who stands behind it all. That's the message he wants to send to himself and those who will witness his journey. Survival is not just about surviving through challenges, but the ability to get up after every stumble, not to let yourself be knocked down by the pain that has passed. Maxwell took a deep breath, letting the fresh air pat his lost soul. He realized that, no matter what, he had discovered one important thing. Justice is not just about winning or losing battles. It's also about accepting losses, and accepting that there are things in life that you can't change. In any case, he could still move forward, even if the road was full of thorns. He smiled gently, not for happiness, but for serenity. He knew that, even though there were many challenges ahead of his life, he would not let himself be defeated. Maxwell has regained his strength, and that, perhaps, is the most important thing in every story. Finally, he closed the door, stepped out, and moved toward a future he would write for himself, with unshakable faith and strength.